The death penalty was not restricted to men in the 19th century. Women were also given the ultimate punishment for crimes that were unforgivable. Join us as we walk through their crimes, final words, and last meals. Lucy Dougherty. Lucy Dougherty, a 40-year-old woman, was hanged in Texas on the 5th of March, 1858. Her story wasn't that of an everyday America, but one that shows the plight of enslaved individuals during a time of deep societal and racial injustice. The circumstances surrounding her alleged crime of murder are not entirely clear, but like many enslaved people, she faced tremendous challenges and immense pressure from her surroundings. The legal system of the time was severely biased against African Americans, particularly those who were enslaved, often denying them fair trials or the opportunity to defend themselves adequately. Acts of violence, whether committed in self-defense or desperation, were met with swift and brutal punishment. The fate of Lucy Dougherty serves as a chilling reminder of the often overlooked narratives of African American women in history, who not only endured the brutalities of slavery, but also navigated a world rife with violence and oppression. Anne Belansky. Anne Belansky, a 34-year-old woman, went to the gallows at St. Paul, Minnesota, for the arsenic poisoning of her husband, Stanislaus, on the 23rd of March, 1860. She was the only female ever executed in the stare. Her hanging process was carried out in privacy, so few saw how she struggled. However, according to the report, she didn't struggle for a long time. Her final words were, "I am innocent. Would to God I could make the world believe it." There was no record of a last meal. Paul Angel. 19-year-old Paul Angel, a Hispanic girl, was hanged by Sheriff Herrera in San Miguel County, New Mexico. This happened on the 26th of April, 1861. She was executed for the murder of her married boyfriend, Miguel Martin, whom she had stabbed to death when he refused to divorce his wife and marry her. According to history, she was taken from jail in a wagon to a suitable tree where she was to hang. But when they arrived, Paula struggled with the sheriff as she stood on the back of the wagon. He had to tie her up before he could draw the wagon off her. She was then hanged. There was no record of a last statement or meal. Chipita Rodriguez. Chipita Rodriguez was hanged from a tree in Texas for the axe murder of horse trader John Savage. She was taken to the execution ground, sitting side saddle on a horse and wearing a new blue dress made for her by the town's women. She denied her crime till the end. Her last words were, "No soy culpable," meaning I am not guilty. Amy Spain, an African American, was hanged from a tree in Darlington, South Carolina, for treason and conduct unbecoming of a slave. When she heard that the Union Army was close at hand and would occupy the town, she expressed her satisfaction by clasping her hands and exclaiming, "Bless the Lord, the Yankees had come." She thought that was the end of slavery, but the townsfolk saw it differently. Mary Surratt. On the 7th of July, 1865, 45 years old, Mary Surratt was hanged by the military at the Washington Arsenal Penitentiary in Washington, D.C. This was for the role she played in the conspiracy to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. This was the first female execution under federal jurisdiction. Her 3 conspirators were executed alongside her. Mary Surratt's final words were brief and quiet. She simply pleaded, "Please don't let me fall." This was addressed to the priest and officials assisting her on the scaffold, as she was weak and needed support. She didn't make a public statement, though she had maintained her innocence throughout the trial. Mary's last meal consisted of bread, butter, and coffee. Martha Grinder. On January 19, 1866, Martha Grinder was hanged in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for poisoning Mary Carruthers and Jane Buchanan through arsenic. She told the astonished jury at her trial, "I love to see death in all its forms and phases, and left no opportunity to gratify my tastes for such sights. Could I have had my way? Probably I should have done more. She went to the gallows set up in Pittsburgh prison bravely and seemed quite gentle in the face of death. Martha wore a brown dress trimmed with white lace and was unusually masked with a white hood on the gallows. The trap opened at 1:15 p.m., and she struggled hard for several minutes after suspension. This was due to the noose being allowed to become damp and not sliding smoothly. There was no record of her final words or meal. However, some alleged she begged God for mercy before her death. Bridget Durgan. On August 30th, 1867, Bridget Durgan, a 22-year-old servant girl of Irish descent, was hanged in the jail yard at New Brunswick, New Jersey. A crowd of about 2,000 people gathered to watch her execution for the murder of her mistress, Mrs. Mary Ellen Corll, who she stabbed to death. She wore a brown suit, white collar, and white gloves, and walked steadily to the gallows. The crowd watched as Bridget was jerked into the air by the mechanism instead of being dropped through a trap. She died struggling and convulsing for some minutes because of the strangulation agonies. Bridget Durgan's exact last words were recorded. She said, "I am guilty. I deserve my date. May God have mercy on my soul." She expressed repentance and prayed with the priest who attended to her before the hanging. Lena Miller. On November 13, 1867, Lena Miller was hanged in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lena was of German descent and had become a figure of local notoriety for poisoning her husband, Xavier Miller. This act captured the community's attention and horrified many. On her execution day, a sizable crowd had gathered in the jail yard. Lena's expression was resignation as she stood before the ropes that would seal her faith. Lena Miller's life was extinguished in a moment, leaving behind a haunting legacy of betrayal and tragedy that would linger in the memories of those who witnessed her fate. Susan Dott. On February 7, 1868, a young maiden of 13 years old was hanged in Henry County, Kentucky for murder. Known as Susan, she was a babysitter and was accused of killing one of her charges. According to a local newspaper, she writhed and twisted and jerked many times. It was reported that many solid citizens asked for a piece of her hanging rope for a souvenir after they cut her down. Mary Wallace. On the 10th of February, 1871, Mary Wallace, a 17-year-old African-American girl, was executed by hanging in Maryland. Her crime, which gripped local headlines and sparked intense public discussion, was the murder of a child through strychnine poisoning. The case against her was marred by social and racial tensions of the time. Mary had been employed as a servant, and the child who died was the young offspring of her employer. The circumstances surrounding the poisoning were murky, and many argued that the evidence against her was not as solid as it seemed. Susan Eberhardt. On May 2, 1873, Susan Eberhardt was hanged in Preston, Stewart County, Georgia, for helping her employer, Enoch Spann, to kill his wife, who had been strangled to death. They were arrested 6 days after the killing and tried and sentenced less than a month after the murder. Susan went to the gallows in a new dress and bonnet supplied by the sheriff, and her hair was neatly braided. She told the crowd of about 700 witnesses that she did not mind dying, as she would be better off. Like her victim, Susan also strangled before her death. Susan Eberhardt's last words were, "I am not guilty of murder. I forgive everybody, and I hope to be forgiven." Alcee Harris. On November 26, 1875, 24 years old, Alcee Harris, an African-American, was hanged at Wachita, Louisiana for murder. Afraid that her husband, Henry, was going to kill her after they had been quarreling, she persuaded a friend, Tony Nellam, to kill him with an axe. Both confessed to their part in the crime, and they were executed side by side on a gallows set up outside the courthouse in front of a crowd estimated at 5,000. Alcee wore a white dress for the hanging. Both prisoners were given quite a short drop, and while Alcee died fairly quickly, Tony struggled for some time after the trap fell at 10:26 a.m. Margaret Meyerhofer. On January 6, 1881, 40-year-old Margaret Meyerhofer was hanged in the Essex County Prison in New Jersey for the murder of her husband John. Her accomplice, Frank Lamons, was executed an hour later on the same gallows. Both were jerked into the air by a falling weight, and in neither case was the neck broken. Margaret was taken to the gallows with the rope around her neck and the black hood on top of her head. It was pulled down at the last moment. Catherine Miller. On February 3, 1881, 29-year-old Catherine Miller was hanged at Williamsport, Pennsylvania, alongside George Smith for murdering Catherine's husband, Andrew. Smith had tried to make the killing look like suicide. They were executed in semi-private before invited witnesses, including reporters. Lunenburg County. On April 22, 1881, a somber gathering of around 100 people formed outside the county jail in Lunenburg County, Virginia, as the community prepared for the semi-private execution of Lucinda Fowlkes. The atmosphere was thick with curiosity, disbelief, and a chilling sense of justice. Lucinda, a black woman, stood accused of murdering her husband in a brutal act that involved an axe. An act she claimed was fueled by years of severe abuse at his hands. This hanging was not just an execution. It was a moment steeped in societal implications, forcing the onlookers to reflect on justice, gender, race, and the human condition within their community. Lucinda Tisdale. On June 23, 1882, Lucinda Tisdale became one of 4 people hanged the same day at Kingstree, South Carolina. She was executed beside Anderson Singleton for the murder of his wife, who was Lucinda's sister. 2 other men were hanged for arson and robbery on the same gallows later in the day. Barbara Miller. September 14, 1883. Barbara Miller, a young black woman aged about 29, was hanged in the jail yard in Richmond, Virginia, for her part in the murder of her husband. Her co-defendant had been executed in August. She was given a drop of 7 feet, but this was inadequate, and she struggled hard for some minutes. Barbara had requested a white muslin dress and a flowered headdress, both of which were provided. She complained that she had not been allowed to be executed with her co-accused, Charles Lee, and told reporters that she did not want a pardon even if the governor offered her one. Margaret Harris. On October 19, 1883, 18-year-old Margaret Harris was hanged at Calhoun, Georgia, for poisoning a young girl called Layla Lewis. Some 3,500 people came to witness this execution, including many women. Margaret died without a struggle. Emmeline Lucy Meeker. On March 30, 1883, Emmeline Lucy Meeker was hanged at Windsor, Vermont, for the poisoning murder of her husband's niece, 9-year-old Alice Meeker, so that she could inherit $400. She was the first of only 2 women to be executed in this state. The other was 21-year-old Mary Rogers in 1905. Emmeline chose a black dress with white trim for her execution and asked to see the gallows beforehand, which was permitted. She was hanged in the prison yard at 1:30 p.m. before an invited audience and was certified dead 14 minutes later. Her last meal consisted of breakfast and lunch. On the morning of her execution, Meeker consumed a substantial breakfast, comprising a large beefsteak, 3 potatoes, a slice of bread and butter, a piece of meat pie, and a cup of coffee. Later, she had a lunch that included 2 boiled eggs, 2 slices of toast, 1 potato, 1 donut, and a cup of coffee. When asked if she had any last words, Meeker declared her innocence, stating, "May God forgive you all for hanging me, an innocent woman. I am as innocent as that man standing here," indicating a deputy. Her family did not attend the execution, nor did they claim her body for burial afterward. Roxalana Druce. On February 28, 1887, 40-year-old Roxalana Druce was hanged in New York for murder. Roxalana and her retarded daughter, Mary, beat her husband John to death and then chopped up his body, afterward boiling down the remains. They lived in a frontier cabin in Little Falls, New York, and were caught because her 12-year-old son informed the police that his father was missing. The alleged motive for the crime was that her husband worked her too hard. Her daughter was given a prison sentence for her part in the crime. At her execution, Roxolana was jerked upwards by a weighted rope instead of being dropped through a trap door, and this failed to break her neck. She took several agonizing minutes to strangle to death on the noose. The scene upset the officials so much that they decided to alter the method of execution. This led to the introduction of the electric chair in 1890. She was the last woman hanged in New York State. Pauline McCoy. On January 21, 1888, 19-year-old Pauline McCoy, an African-American, was hanged at Union Springs in Montgomery, Alabama, for the murder of Annie Jordan, a teenage white girl. The apparent motive was to steal Annie's shoes. Pauline was in a state of virtual collapse on the gallows and had to be supported by 2 sheriff's deputies. Sarah Jane Whiteling. On June 25, 1889, Sarah Jane Whiteling, a 51-year-old white woman, was executed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the murders by arsenic poisoning of her husband, son, and daughter. She had mounted a defense of insanity brought on by menopause, but the jury rejected this. The execution was carried out in the corridor of the county prison and was attended by 30 witnesses who saw the trap fall at 10:07 a.m., less than a minute after Sarah had mounted it. On the day of her execution, Whiteline appeared calm and composed, expressing her belief that she would soon be reunited with her family in heaven. After a brief prayer led by Reverend William D. Jones, the trapdoor was released, leading to her death by hanging. Elizabeth Potts. On June 20, 1890, Mrs. Elizabeth Potts and her husband Josiah, a middle-aged white couple, were hanged in Elko, Nevada, for killing Miles Fawcett. Their motive appeared to be financial gain. After their appeals had been turned down, an execution date was set, and a gallows was brought from California and reassembled in the prison yard. Elizabeth had a new white dress with black silk bows made for her execution. In the trap, their wrists were bound, their shoes removed, and their legs strapped. They leaned forward and kissed affectionately before the black hoods were pulled over their heads and nooses adjusted around their necks. The trap was sprung at 10:44 a.m., the force of the drop nearly decapitating Elizabeth, who had put on weight in prison. Blood was seen oozing from the hood and running down the front of her dress. 52 men were present to witness this gruesome spectacle. Elizabeth was the only woman ever executed in Nevada. Elizabeth Potts proclaimed her innocence on the gallows, exclaiming, "God help me, I am innocent." Her husband echoed this sentiment, stating, "God knows we are innocent," as the black caps were drawn over their heads. Henrietta Merle. A somber event occurred in Smithville, a small town in Charlotte County, Virginia, on September 29, 1891. Henrietta Merle, an African-American woman, faced the gallows after being convicted of a crime that would forever mark her life and the lives of those around her. The nature of her crime was particularly tragic. She had confessed to the murder of her 8-year-old child. On that fateful day, as the sun cast long shadows across the town, a gathering of townsfolk came to witness the execution. The event was a grim reminder of the ultimate price paid for unforgivable actions. Caroline Shipp. January 22, 1892, Caroline Shipp was publicly hanged in Gaston County, North Carolina, for the murder of her son by poisoning. She was taken to the gallows in a horse-drawn cart, seated on her coffin. On the trap, she sang a hymn and prayed with her minister. She was then given a handkerchief to hold and drop when ready for the trap to spring. When asked if she had any final words, she turned her head and the knot moved to the front. As a result, her neck wasn't broken, and she struggled hard until the deputy sheriff added his weight to hers and strangled her. Caroline was left hanging all day, and it was reported that people brought their picnic lunches to her execution. Caroline was pregnant when she was executed, but had not told the authorities, which would have saved her. Milbrey Brown. On October 7, 1892, 15-year-old Milbury Brown, an African-American, was hanged at Spartanburg, South Carolina, for killing a 1-year-old white child. She shared the gallows with John Williams, who had been convicted of the murder of J. Henneman, the mayor. They were executed at 11 a.m. before 20 witnesses and were given a drop of 6 feet each, which proved adequate to break their necks. On the same day, unmarried mother Anna Tribble was hanged in private at Newberry, South Carolina, for the murder of her baby on February 23rd. She had deserted the baby in a field. Amanda Cody. On November 22, 1895, Amanda Cody and 20-year-old Florence English went to the gallows in private at Warrenton, Georgia. These two were having an affair and were hanged for the murder of Amanda's husband, Cicero. On the day of their execution, both Cody and English were deeply immersed in religious fervor. They participated in a prayer meeting in the jail corridor led by 3 African-American ministers. During this session, the prisoners actively engaged, swaying and singing hymns. Their spiritual engagement continued onto the gallows, where they sang hymns together until the trapdoor was released. Mary Snodgrass. July 10, 1896, 28-year-old Mary Snodgrass was hanged at Coburn, Virginia, for murdering her baby by burning it in the fireplace. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to bring more cases like this to light, kindly hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives.